Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started since it's just after 6, and we want to try to, we have a full hour blocked off for this. If we need to go a few minutes later, we can. Hopefully we can get most of our questions answered. Go ahead, Sasha, and go to the first slide. I have a couple of slides I always start off with, just in case somebody's joining us tonight for the first time. First of all, this is our return to school planning team, and our district task force in the middle is made up of all of our members of cabinet. It's also made up of our Board of Education representative, Karen Hirsch, Mary Keller, who is our head of nursing, and Dr. Katie Noble, who is our doctor consultant. And we have been getting inputs for many months now from all of the different focus groups, from all the different areas around the school district. You'll see there's school scheduling, transportation, curriculum, communications. There's a tremendous amount of planning that has gone into trying to get our doors open in September. And many, many people have contributed to the plan. We have had several task force meetings, and again, if you're joining us for the first time and you want to go back and look at documents or look at any of the meetings which have been recorded, we would encourage you to look at the most recent. This week on Monday, we had an elementary town hall. We had a town hall focused specifically on middle school and specifically on high school. A lot of tremendous, wonderful information based around specific developmental ages. We also have, of course, the special education town hall tonight that will be recorded. And then tomorrow night, our Board of Education will also be discussing reopening through a virtual meeting tomorrow evening. We have had numerous focus groups working very hard to hear from our constituents around Greenwich. We've done our elementary teachers, our secondary teachers, our specialists. We've had a PTAC, PTA input session. Last night there was a joint session with League of Women Voters and PTA, and that will also be posted on our site. We've had many special education focus group meetings now. I believe we're up to about 6, Mary. I believe tomorrow will be 7.
I think so, yeah.
We had a very large community town hall that was very well attended. We also have a large Q&A document that we are continuing to update that is available online. And we try, if something changes from the state, we're trying to go back in and adjust any of those answers that could have changed slightly, for instance, mask wearing or something of that nature. So we do, again, I've already mentioned our board meeting, which will be tomorrow night, and you can find that link. One of the questions I also get that I'm addressing this week in our town halls is the decision-making process on whether we are in person, whether we are hybrid, or whether we are remote. And this has just been a question that has been asked a lot over the last week or so. And this is based on the study adapted from the Harvard Global Health Institute publication, and the Connecticut Department of Health put this chart together to help guide the localities. And it's based on how many new cases over a 7-day period per 100,000 population. And they look at that by county. Our local Greenwich information is actually uploaded every week to the state. And then the state has a database where they provide that information back to us on whether or not we're in that yellow, orange, or red area. We also look at secondary indicators that you can see down below. Some of those secondary indicators can be anything from a flu, something that the flu is happening in your building and we're struggling to know, is it the flu or is it COVID? Could also be a secondary factor, could also be lack of substitutes, which could actually force, a district to perhaps go full remote. So those secondary factors are also important and they will be all year long. This is just some of the Connecticut coronavirus statistics. And if you go ahead and go to the next one, Sasha. And again, this is just showing where Fairfield County is. We are at a very low, very, very low rate. And when you look at where we are poised in one of the best positions to be able to get our schools open. And that's based on the Connecticut Department of Health, our Greenwich Department of Health. And then they've also had several, leading epidemiologists and other specialists weigh in, such as Dr. Fauci, who has also stated that this is, Connecticut is posed to be in a perfect position to be reopening our schools because we are so low. In our special education return to school planning, there are several documents that are available. We do have our school reopening plan. There's also an addendum that is a resource document for students with high needs. There's also addendum 6. We get addendums now almost every day, which is reopening guidance for educating students with disabilities. And while I won't read this whole slide to you, because I know that the people who are watching tonight, a lot of you want to ask questions. And so we've really tried to focus this week. We know a lot of you have watched many of these meetings or been part of focus groups, and we want to have more time. So we don't want to speak at you. We would like to hear it from you so we can give you your answers. But what I will say is much of the language we're using comes straight from the guidance documents from the state of Connecticut, and that's intentional so that our language matches what the state has asked us to do. If you would like to submit a question, down on the lower portion of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. You can click on that and type a question. Dr. Carabillo and Mark D'Amico are going to ask those questions, and we welcome them. So please start submitting your questions, and we will start with live questions right now.
Anne, would you like to take the first one?
I would love to take the first one. Hi, thank you all for everything you are doing. I would like to know, what does a special education schedule look like along with general education for remote learners? Thank you. So Mark, do you want to talk about it for the elementary school?
Sure. Let me talk about it from an upper elementary standpoint. And then if you want, I can backfill it to a primary. In previous presentations, I did share what would be considered a K2 model and then a 3-5 model. In a remote learning environment, you would start with a morning meeting that would be roughly 15 minutes. That could also be a social emotional learning activity, a norm building activity. You would transition into a content area. So for example, it could be a math lesson. The first 15 minutes would be math instruction by the teacher. That would roughly be about 15 minutes. But then for the remainder of the hour, that 45 minutes would be broken up into small group instruction or independent work, where the teacher still is available and online to answer student questions. Mary?
And then when you ask what would it look like for special education services, that's probably the time where if students have special education services in the area of math, that they would get their individually specially designed instruction. So while some students are working on assignments given by the gen ed teachers, other students could be either live streaming or working on different assignments with their special education teacher, or doing some independent work, again, designed by the special education teacher, but supported by a paraprofessional.
Thanks, Mary. That's really helpful. Once math instruction is over, we transition into another content area that could be science. That would be a 30-minute block of time. And again, if there's IEP goals written specifically around that content area, there would be support from a special education teacher or paraprofessional as prescribed in the plan. There would be time for a snack and a break. Then we would transition to another content area. And since we talked about math first, it's likely it would be the language arts block. And it would be very similar to the math block in that you would have direct instruction to the whole class first. And then the teacher would design it so that they could either break students up into small groups, which the teacher could then circulate through, and or provide independent support for particular students, and or be available for the whole class should they have follow-up questions. And again, back to what Mary stated just a few moments ago, that's also time when the special education teacher or paraprofessional or another service provider could provide support in that area. There would be a lunch and recess designation, off video time we're calling it. And then the students would log back in for a special area, whether it be art, music, PE, or Spanish. Those could be synchronous, they could be asynchronous. And then you would have, again, opportunities for social studies and or writing. And then the end of the day, the teacher would bring the class back together for either an interactive read aloud or a whole class sharing, maybe tee up some activities that are coming up for tomorrow to build excitement and interest in returning the next day, and a closing activity. And again, it mirrors pretty closely the type of experience students will have, whether they're in school or whether they're remote.
So for example, if there were activities like art or PE, what we would try to do is, as much as we can, embed their related services into those activities. So if you had a student who had some fine motor support from an occupational therapist, we would, if at all possible, try and make that happen in the context of the writing activity that students are doing in the classroom. Or if they have gross motor goals, that we would try to embed that into the PE class or the PE activity as much as possible.
Yeah, Mary, and to add on to that, again, I think it's important to note that the model I'm sharing with you is a conceptual model that has been shared with all of the principals. They will take that and make it specific and unique to their building. And it's important to know some buildings have 13 or 14 sections, some buildings are 22, 23 sections. So the way their ultimate schedule will look will vary depending on the number of sections, when services are available. So not everyone would have language arts at the same time during the day. Things could very well be staggered. But a very clearly established schedule will be shared with you so that you can follow it and that it's consistent. That's the more important thing.
At the secondary level, since those classes are running their regular schedule, our anticipation is that students would be in whatever special ed services they were getting were they live. So that if they have a skills class or a resource room that's in the schedule, that schedule is running at the middle and high school, and they would just participate in those classes. And so if the students, the idea of remote is a little bit different at the high school, since everybody will be at some point technically remote. So those services would be provided within the schedule that they already had determined.
The next question, understanding that SPED services will be pushed in as much as possible, how will services such as counseling with social workers or school psychologists work?
Really depends on the nature of the goal and objective and what the service was in what I'm calling the pre-pandemic IEP. So if students had something like social skills activities in a group around turn taking, it's possible that that could be pushed in during a class where students were working in a group around a project. So instead of working with a para or a gen ed teacher, the psychologist or social worker could lead that group, again, building in the context of the classroom, working on the social skills goals. If there were any group activities that were going to involve either lessons or discussions that would set the students apart and not be appropriate to happen inside a classroom, they would not happen in the classroom. And we would find space outside of the classroom for those groups to happen. Our goal is that they would be in cohort groups to the maximum extent possible. If in fact the group requires cross-cohorting, parents will be informed of that. And if they object to the fact that there may be kids from other cohorts in the group, we'll have to make other arrangements. But we would not do push-in services if the nature of the service did not make sense in a classroom, either because of what's going on in the classroom or the students felt stigmatized by the activity, or just out of respect for their privacy.
Okay, the next question is for you again, Mary. What is the criteria for special education students to go 4 days in the high school, and when will we be told?
You'll probably be told either maybe Friday, but Monday. We've got the criteria. We've shared it with the secondary staff primarily because that's who it involves right now since they're hybrid. We started with the criteria the state gave us for students with high need. And you can see those definitions in the document that the state produced. We also wanted to make sure that there are some students for whom the nature of their disability is not captured necessarily in high need, but who were disproportionately impacted by our distance learning activities over the spring. And they may be students for whom risk assessments were completed, who had high failure rates in courses, whose participation during the spring jeopardized their ability to graduate in June. So we've come up with about 5 or 6 additional criteria that we're going to ask schools to look at when they're considering which students would, given the impact of the disability, need to go to school 4 days. We originally thought that we would have kids come in 5 days, but the nature of the cleaning at the high school, in order for us to get the building deep cleaned between the Greenwich and the Cardinals groups, really requires, I think, for safety's sake, that we don't have students in the building at the time. So we're looking at a group of students for whom 4 days a week would be their attendance in the building, and parents will be notified of the students that we believe qualify for that intensive service. And then certainly if parents were not notified and they feel their students should qualify, they can contact the school and we would reconsider and look at them vis-a-vis the criteria.
Mark and Ann, I might actually, there's one question that was just above that one. What choice for learning model is being offered for students? And that is the same across the district. We have the 3 models. We must have fully in person, where we do, Mary was just explaining at the high school, while we are on a hybrid, there are adjustments that will be made for those high need students that need to be at the campus 4 days a week. We also have a remote option. So students who are in special education could choose full remote if that should be their choice.
Okay, the next question, how will we, oh, I just missed it. How will the district handle the large influx of PPTs that will take place in evaluations once school starts?
We did start making up meetings as soon as we were able to do face-to-face in the spring. So we did get some meetings that we were able to schedule out of the way then. This summer, we concentrated our evaluation efforts on those students who were referred for initial evaluations, but for whom their testing was either interrupted or did not begin. So we had signed consent. Either they started testing or they were just about to start testing, and we had to stop because of the closure. So those were our primary students for this summer. We think we have addressed almost all of the students who were either in process or had signed consent. Now that we get back into school, we'll start having meetings for those students for whom either teams were considering making a recommendation for evaluation, and those students will start from day one once we get back into the buildings. We do have PPTs that needed to be made up. So there were some parents that we asked or parents asked to postpone. We will start scheduling those as soon as we can. If we need to do some additional hours outside of school, we may have to do that, but our goal is to get them all done as quickly as possible so that we're back on schedule with all of our annual review dates and triennials.
The next question is, how will I be notified of my child's progress on her IEP? I can give that answer, or you can, Mary, go ahead.
Same as you always were. So anytime report cards go out or any progress notes go out, you will get progress notes on IEP goals and objectives. The only difference is in some cases there were objectives in particular that just didn't make sense being worked on in a remote setting. So it could be something like, sharing your lunch with peers, which you couldn't do if you were remote. So there are some goals that we just couldn't work on, and those would get the O rating for other, and it would indicate that they were not worked on given the impact of scheduling due to the pandemic. For every other goal that was worked on, goals and objectives, you will receive progress notes as often as other students get them. So report card time and progress note time at the high school.
We have, hello, thank you for taking our questions. How difficult would it be for a student enrolled in hybrid learning to transition to all online should he or she choose for health family reasons?
I'll start, but other people can jump in. I think our whole goal in designing how we're proceeding with school is we're trying to do it in a way that allows us to go back and forth between models as easily as possible. So we are looking at, if you look at the high school, they should be able to go all remote or stay in hybrid by the way we've designed the program. So hopefully it should not be too difficult for students to go in and out. However, the remote school is operating with its own set of activities. So it may be that they were doing something on Monday, and if they jump into hybrid or back, no, they couldn't jump in, they'd have to wait their 2 weeks. But if you're in hybrid and you jump to remote, there's no guarantee that the exact activity is being worked on the exact same way. But we're all using the Greenwich curriculum, we're all using the same grade level standards, so it should be very similar. Again, you can go from hybrid to remote the next day. If you go from remote to hybrid, there is the 2-week period to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. Sorry, Mark.
Actually, Mary, the remote school is really only for the elementary students. If you're doing remote at the secondary level, you are in the regular classroom, so there isn't any difference between being in that class. So you are okay. The only thing that we would have to do is have some time to make sure that there's enough desks and space between students as we have students come into the classroom if they have been out as a remote learning student.
Next question. When will GHS special ed students receive notification of their schedules?
I might speak to this one. So tonight our remote learner opt-out closes. Once that closes tonight, then we know exactly how many students we actually have on site. We are also looking at if we have any teachers that had medical exemptions, they have to be moved to remote also. So once that closes tonight, that work will start tomorrow, and we will work as quickly as we can, but the high school, especially because they're hybrid, must make sure their classes are balanced. And so special education students and general education students will get their schedules as soon as they're able to balance all those classes for the remote, and the teachers that have opted to go remote as well. We'll be working on that tomorrow.
Next question. I note schools in Norwalk are prioritizing in-class education for high school special education students. Given the impact of distance learning, Greenwich does not appear to be taking this approach. Why not?
I'll start, and people, do you want to start, Tony, or should I?
Well, I was going to say, I think you answered that before, in that those families that need to be accessing, 4 days a week at our high school, we're going to be working with our families so that they can do that. I don't know if you want to add to that, Mary, but that, we're going to make sure that we're doing that.
Just the only thing I would add is special ed students encompasses a wide range of kids. We had students who received special ed services who did very well in distance learning, actually did better in distance learning than they do in schools for some students. So they're not just one kind of kid. So if the student did very well in distance learning, then the hybrid model should work very well for them. We did have some students who did not do so well, and we will be prioritizing making sure that those students can attend 4 days.
Will there be any additional staff hired given the large influx of PPTs, backed up evaluations, triennials, complexity of delivering services, et cetera?
So I would say that we've invested this summer, and I think Mary again alluded to that just previously, that we've been doing a lot of assessments over the summer. And so the backup, I think, is not what people may think that it would be because of the summer work that has gone on. It's many, many, many hours of work over the summer. And if we need staff, we evaluate that based on where the needs are. We'll also be balancing again for remote versus the in school. So that's another piece that we'll be evaluating. If we need staff, we absolutely would get the staff.
The next two questions are very similar. First, I'd like to thank all of you for all of your efforts in trying to support our children during these uncertain times. Question is, to the extent that a student has a para-education, as a para, I'll say the word, in all classes to ensure accessibility and also to push out goals in the IEP, how will that be implemented in the remote learning environment? Mary, do you want to start with that one?
I will. It depends on what the one-to-one para was there for, or more likely additional adult support. In some cases, students have additional adult support to be able to move them safely around the building. So they need a para to help them get from point A to point B. That's not the case in remote learning. So that kind of service would not be necessary. In other cases, they need a paraprofessional to assist them with some of the activities of daily living, like eating or toileting. Again, if they're home and in remote, that service would not be necessary. A lot of students have some additional adult support to help them refocus. Again, if you're home, you're not in a classroom with 22 other kids and you don't have those kind of distractions. So it really does depend on what the professional assistant was there to provide in terms of support. If they were there to provide support for generalization and practice of skills, then they can still be available to do that either, and they can do it by providing some asynchronous kinds of things, or they can certainly be live streaming. And we usually let parents know when it will be a professional assistant who's live streaming with a student to provide practice of generalization skills.
Will special education students be pulled from general education classrooms for one-to-one instruction? Will they be going back and forth from cohort to specials, or will they not be part of a general education cohort?
I'll start, and then Mark, you may want to talk about how specials will be done. All students will be parts of cohorts. So if you're a third grade student, you'll be in the third grade cohort, and you will participate with that group of kids all day long. The purpose, again, is to limit the contact with the number of people so that you're limiting exposure. So every student is a member of a cohort. If a student's IEP calls for one-to-one instruction, if that can be done appropriately in the classroom, we'll do it in the classroom. If it can't be done in the classroom for whatever reason, and had been a pull-out service prior, then we can continue to do that by finding space somewhere else in the building. I know a lot of people are concerned about space. I just want to reiterate that there's no intention for us to lose the space that had already been designated for special ed services. So academic labs, resource rooms, speech offices, none of those rooms have been taken away. They're still available. The only difference is if it's a long walk or if it has the student walking through the building. If we can avoid that, we will. If we can't avoid it, we'll try and schedule it so that it happens when other kids are not in the hallways, again, to decrease contact. Do you want to talk about specials?
Can I just make one comment as well, just because we have about 108 people watching. So when we answer the questions, we might want to just be sure that we focus that it's for K-5 or secondary, because I know we're so used to seeing these questions, we know, but that was an elementary question with an elementary answer. I just want to make sure in case we have some secondary parents watching, obviously.
Yeah, Mary, the only thing I would add to that is we absolutely are having students start off in their designated homeroom. They're staying in that homeroom to the greatest extent possible, leaving for specials, lunch and recess. But a child who's receiving special ed services would be remaining with that cohort unless there's a need to be pulled out for a one-on-one session that couldn't be included in the mainstream classroom.
And it's the same for the middle schools, so that your child will be in with a group of like students, and say it's 3 teams at Eastern. They have 3 6th grade teams, 3 7th grade teams, and 3 8th grade teams. And your child will be assigned to a team of students that they will travel with all day long. And if they are in need of any kind of specialized instruction, then they would be going to a place, hopefully in that same vicinity, to receive those services.
I also think maybe it's important at this point, we're halfway through, to kind of remind parents that this schedule that we are creating has never been done before. So we're going to test it out. We're certainly going to be very open and appreciative to feedback that you provide to us. So if something isn't working for your child, and in particular, if you're concerned about the way services are being delivered, or if you have questions about that, please reach out to your building administrators to have those conversations, because we are going to experience some bumps along the way. But we plan on being very nimble and flexible in our ability to change course so that we are doing the very best we can to provide children with the services that they need. Next question. Last year, we heard from parents and special education teachers that they were understaffed and unable to meet their requirements in students' IEPs. With more children with IEPs entering GPS, this will continue to be a problem. Will SPED teachers be hired to address this need? And I think, Dr. Jones, you've already addressed this.
Yep.
And just as an aside, we mentioned this at our last meeting of the task force. Right as of 10 days ago, we had only 2 adds. We had 17 students added, but 15 students withdrew with IEPs at the K-8 levels. We had about, I don't have the number in front of me right now, I think there were 5 new preschoolers that we weren't expecting, and there were 12 adds to the high school. So it hasn't been a huge influx of students at this point, but if we get to a position where we feel that we can't serve the students appropriately, we would certainly make the request for additional staff.
So the next question says, I am interpreting the services to be pushed into the existing classroom versus pull out. This is confusing to me. How can a group of kids be taught differently within the same classroom? Could you please address this? My child has ADHD and focus issues, so this is not clear as to how this will be helpful to such kids.
I'll start and then you guys can jump in. If you recall, we spent the last 3 years working on personalized learning so that it's more often than not in the general education classroom, you have students working on different kinds of activities at a different pace in different groups. So push-in services just become another adult in the room providing kind of a different, outside of what typically happens in a classroom. So it could be that the teacher has a small group with students, 2 of whom have goals on their IEP, and 1 student who may be just struggling in that particular area. So it's not unusual for students to be working in small groups in the classrooms all around the district, doing different kinds of activities at a different pace. And that was our push towards personalized learning. So again, if in fact push-in services are not working, given the nature of the instruction or the impact of the disability, and those students' IEPs pre-pandemic had called for pull-out services, we will continue to do that within the cohort if possible.
And I would say that the majority of teachers today do work with different groups of students, and students have different activities to do. We'd like to make sure that students have the opportunity to collaborate with one another and learn from one another. So while one adult in the classroom may be working with a group of students, another adult in the classroom may be working with another group of students, and then there may be a group of students that are working independently, and then another group that's working independently. The other thing to think about is that because we do have the opportunity for parents to have students either in school or out of school, that's going to change the number of students in each class. So they will have other opportunities to participate with their teacher or to learn different strategies in both the remote learning situation and in the in-school situation.
As Mark said, this is kind of new and uncharted territory. But a lot of the things that we're doing for social distancing may in fact make the classroom less busy and less active and, quite frankly, less distracting for some kids. So I think there may be students for whom the busy classrooms of yore are going to be a little bit more sedate. Kids will be at their desks. There will be some social distancing that'll be practiced. So I think there may be less distraction in the classroom, which will benefit from some of our students than what it looked like prior to coming back.
This is an important question. I want to make sure we address it tonight. If a student fell behind during the remote learning in the spring and it seems their IEP needs to be updated before the annual meeting, what should we do? And my answer to this, Mary, would be the answer I'd have whether we were in a pandemic or not. Anytime you feel that there is a need to revisit your child's IEP, it's a live document, continually in a draft form, so to speak, so that you can always come back to the table and discuss current level of progress and whether or not there's a need to add or even remove goals if a child is successfully mastering them at a pace more accelerated than anticipated. How'd I do, Mary?
You did okay. You did okay. But I would also say that we need to realize that everybody's been out of school for almost 6 months. So, our goal is to get the kids back in school, find out where they are, and then try and move everybody forward. So I do think that everybody will be impacted somewhat by being out of school for this length of time. So I wouldn't jump right away to say, let's have a meeting after 2 days of being in school. I'd give the kids a time to settle into the new routine, get the teachers back into the IEPs, and then if in fact the present level of performance has changed, then we can always go back to a meeting and change the PLEP statements and the goals and objectives. But again, I'd give everybody just a little bit of time to reorient being back in the classroom. Next.
What will remote learning look like for special education students at the high school level?
A lot like it did last year. The high school is running its regular schedule, so it's the 8-drop 2 block schedule day. If students were scheduled for 3 blocks a cycle of resource room or academic lab, I'm sorry, they'll have 3 blocks a cycle of academic lab. If they are, and I'm not sure who's Monday, Tuesday, if that's the Cardinals or the Greenwich, but if they're the Cardinals and they're in school on Monday and Tuesday, and that's day A and B, and that's when their academic lab was, they'll get that face-to-face. And then if they are remote on Wednesday for day C, it would be a remote academic lab. Again, unless those students are so significantly impacted, they require 4 days a week of service, but they're following the regular schedule.
The next question, in elementary school, if we have to go distance learning, could we possibly have in-person masked outdoor meetings for special services such as school psychologist speech, potentially on the school field? Virtual meetings for these specialists proved very challenging last year, particularly for children who are distracted by the technology. Thank you for all you are working on.
I think it would depend on why we go remote, and then Tony and maybe Ann, you want to jump in on this. If we go remote because we don't have enough subs to cover the building or for some structural reason, then there shouldn't be any reason why we couldn't have some small groups and make arrangements. If we're forced into remote because of a high level of virus, then clearly we don't want to have people coming in and going face to face. So some of that will depend on the reason behind why we go remote. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
I might just add, Mary, that we are looking from, the first week of school, trying to make sure that some of our related services are available to our families who are remote that want to bring their children, following after the model that we used in the summer, and looking at our Millbank building. And so that parents that want to just come for a related service, in face-to-face like we did in the summer, will be able to do that. So that's something that we are already planning. And certainly if as long as teachers are safe to be in our buildings and we don't have a governor's executive order like we did last year that completely shut the building, then we can offer some of that face-to-face. Absolutely.
Tony, maybe it's worth mentioning, since we have so many people online, just explain a little bit about what the Millbank building is.
Yeah, it's a building where we have our psychologists, our eval teams have been based inside that building. We are moving those staff members back to Havemeyer so that building can be used for related services. Again, to operate very similar like we did in summer school, and that was very successful for our families, where they could be face-to-face and have a speech service, but maybe they're not comfortable being in the full school building for the day. So that will be available. And that building is located, it's just right out very close to JC, to Julian Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
In the shadow of the planetarium.
Correct. So Will the district hold the PBT if services need to be changed and will look different on the service delivery plan? You've already answered that question, Mary, I think.
I have, but let me just again reiterate that there's what I refer to as the pre-pandemic IEP. So every student is required to have an IEP that if we walked back into school like it was 1999, so we go back to regular school, that IEP is in place. Our direction from the state is not to change those pre-pandemic IEPs to reflect either hybrid instruction or distance learning. However, if the students' present levels of performance have changed, so the actual content of the IEP needs to change, we absolutely will have a meeting to reflect that, but then the services would be designed for a pre-pandemic school situation, not distance learning or remote.
We need to balance safety needs with our children's educational rights guaranteed in their IEP. The state guidelines do refer to flexibility in providing IEP services, but the guidelines stress the importance of providing a free and appropriate education. Some language in the reopening plan does not follow the spirit of these guidelines. For instance, if we are told parents will be notified if children will receive services outside the cohort, but shouldn't this be worded as the team will collaborate with parents to determine which services might take place outside the cohort? Also, what is a pre-pandemic IEP? This language implies that major changes are coming to our children's IEPs and that these changes will not be made in collaboration with us.
The pre-pandemic IEP, again, is my language. It refers to the IEP that would have been in place or is in place for your child without having had COVID. So if in December of 2019, your child had an IEP that had a present level of performance and goals and objectives for them in the 6th grade at Eastern Middle School, which included counseling, speech, and academic lab every day for 45 minutes. That's the foundational IEP that we're working with. Our goal is, to the maximum extent we can, to keep that IEP in place so that it looks just like it did beforehand. But there may be, given some of the things that are going to happen with scheduling and cohorting, there may be something that happens that we have to say on Thursday, you know, we're going to have to go down to 30 minutes of the resource room or academic lab in order to accommodate some function or something that happened. It has to happen because of scheduling or because of the way we have to provide services. It may be that the room has to be, they may have had speech for 30 minutes and we may have to go down to 25 because we have to clean the room and change PPEs before the next student. Something that is different because of what we have to do in response to the pandemic. So in that case, we'll let parents know that we have to make this change. So that's where we're asking for some flexibility. It's not going to be dramatic that you used to have resource room every day in the elementary school, and now you're going to get it once a week. That's not our plan at all. It's to continue to provide, to the maximum extent we can, the IEP that was in place before we had to go through all of these machinations to keep kids safe in light of the pandemic.
Mary, if I can add to that too, I think the piece that's in quotes on there, parents will be notified if children will receive services. I think that's exactly what you've talked about. If there was a need where we're having to make a change because of something that's happening with the pandemic. The second part of that is also correct, and we can certainly go in and look at our document, and maybe we need both of these statements reflected, because we absolutely will be collaborating with our families on their services that are outside the cohort, because it may in fact be you could go once a week, you know, for the 70 minutes, or twice a week for 30 minutes, but they would have more interaction with perhaps students outside the cohort. But we will collaborate with our families on that, absolutely. So I think both of those statements are correct. They're both really talking about two different pieces, and we can clarify that and work on our language to be clearer for families to understand in our document.
Next question. Ready to go. Are there additional school supplies parents need to purchase for special education distance learners? Do you expect to circulate a separate list of supplies for all distance learners? We're not expecting to have a separate list of supplies for all distance learners, but we want them to be able to have those opportunities to participate in the arts or in PE. You might want to make sure that your child has a mask for when they go outside, but we're not thinking that we're going to have a separate list of supplies. What we are going to do though is if your child needs something that is on paper because they need something written out rather than on a device, if you let Mrs. Ford know, she will make sure that that can be done, and we will make sure that it is delivered to your home so your child has the opportunity to participate in a different format rather than on the device. They can do it on a paper and pencil, and then we can go from there.
Except don't call Mrs. Ford, that's my mother.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mary Ford.
Next question. So in essence, my child in grade 4 would receive a mini lesson in general education in math and reading, and then be joined by a para or special education teacher during his independent time to fulfill his IEP goals. If I'm speaking in generalities, that could be the case, but again, not knowing your child's particular IEP goals, it is dependent on what the content is and what exactly the goal is that's related to the content that's being taught at the time. But yes, if a service provider is intended to be supporting your child during math class, we would want the service provider to be there for the mini lesson, because quite often they scaffold the instruction from the mini lesson to meet the needs of the child and at the same time balance the goal that might be written on a plan. Mary, do you want to add to that?
Just that was our intention in looking at cohorting our teachers, so that the teachers hopefully will be able to be given the numbers, and this is all dependent on who's coming and who's going. They will work with only 2 grade levels, so that they will be with smaller cohorts of students rather than spread across the building as some of our teachers were, especially at the elementary level, so that they could be in the 1st grade with that cohort from 9 to 11 in the morning. It may make sense for them to be in the mini lesson, as Mark said, for the particular students. There are other students that were never in the mini lesson, and that's when they had some pullout time. If that's the case, then we would hope that we were able to do that given the schedule and our staffing. So again, we're going to try and stay with the foundational pre-pandemic IEP to the maximum extent we can. Next question.
I understand that students at Greenwich High School will only attend 2 days out of the week. Can my child attend 4 days instead? And it depends on if the child meets that criteria, which you will be getting out to parents and discussing it with your teams.
Next question. Why are there no complex learning cohorts in Greenwich, especially at this time when our most complex learners are more vulnerable?
I might answer that question because I think that's based on another district that has a program that's called complex learner cohorts. It is very different than what we have in Greenwich, and we don't have one site where students leave their home neighborhood schools and actually go to one school. And Mary, I don't know if you want to add to that, but it also takes time to build a program like that to make sure it's highly effective and that people have the right training for a complex learner cohort as well. It's a different model.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if what the state's direction to us is that you should not be creating cohorts of kids with disabilities, that's not the intention. So if they were not in a group already before we went out due to the pandemic, then they should not create their own group now. So we've been following that. That doesn't mean that a teacher may not have the group of students in the 3rd grade for pull-out services for an hour a day that she or he had before we went out. That's still a possibility, but they remain part of their grade level cohort to the maximum extent possible during the day.
The next question is, sorry I missed this. Will school be fully open for students of special needs? If your student is going to be in school physically in grades pre-K through 8, They will be fully included in every day of school as long as we are still currently in school. Your child is at the high school. There are two choices. Your child will be in school either on Monday and Tuesday, and then out remotely Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or they'll be out remote on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and in school on Thursday, Friday. But they always have the opportunity to, and I'm going to use the incorrect term, Dr. Jones, I'm going to try to make the right term, live web cam participation. Did I do that correctly?
That's good.
Okay. So that they will be a part of the class, they'll just be home. But Mary Ford also spoke about if the child meets certain criteria, your child may be at the high school for 4 days.
Will a room be provided in each building for physical and occupational therapy and other special education pullouts?
My understanding is that as of today, knowing what we know today, any space that was designated special education space will stay designated special education space. There's a possibility there may be some more available space given students who are coming and going, but we are not losing any space at this time.
And we have also, especially in our middle school, they are capturing the media center because we can't have young people going in checking out books. That's a high touch area. So to provide more space and more open space, they are having some of their services in their media center as well. And plexiglass was ordered for that and is being set up appropriately to expand the space in middle school.
Next question, at the middle and high school, will teachers be wearing a mic? How easy will it be for virtually attending students to hear the teachers and/or students may ask questions? Is closed captioning a possibility? Yes, closed captioning is a possibility. That is in Google Meets. That is one of the things that we can use. And the teachers will be having mics that I believe that they will be able to wear them, Dr. Jones, or those are the mics that we have purchased for the teachers so that the students can hear who are remote learners.
Yes, we have increased the audio quality. Our special education families actually shared with us that was one of the challenges last spring, was that although the teachers were live or they were having a drop-in session, that the audio quality sometimes just was not clear or loud enough. So we have bought microphones for our teachers so that it will enhance that quality for those teachers using webcams.
And any student who has additional hearing assistance required, Megan White has been ordering some different kinds of lanyards so that they can have both the student's individual mic and the school mic in ways that they don't set each other off. That's not the technical term, but for any parent of a student with a hearing disability, Megan White's been working closely with the providers of those pieces of equipment to make sure that they're compatible with the mics that teachers will be wearing.
The next question, how will ESL be delivered, those services delivered? They'll be delivered in the same way. The only difference may be at the middle schools. Level 1 ESL learners and level 2 ESL learners may be in the same class depending on the cohorting. Otherwise, they'll be delivered in the same manner.
For those students that choose full remote learning, will they be assigned a different special education monitor? That's
probably going to happen. If there's any possibility of keeping students with their teacher, so their teacher is going to be assigned to remote learning, we'll certainly do that if we can. But given the number of special education teachers and the number of students who may be requesting remote, there's a good possibility you would not be with your teacher that you would have during the school year. If that's the case, we will do the same kind of bridging preparations we do when students move from 5th to 6th and 8th to 9th. We have meetings where they share information, the IEPs are shared, and we'll make sure that staff have an opportunity to talk to each other about the individual needs of students.
That was answered already. Is there a plan for evaluations for students opting remote? We will do the same thing if we will have a place where students can have evaluations, and that would be at Millbank. And if they need to have that evaluation or their triennial, then those will be scheduled and held.
Again, depending on why, if they are in the remote school through choice, that's what we'll do. If we have to go to remote because of some viral issue, then we would go back to where we were without having the face-to-face services.
How will professional assistants work with remote learning?
Very similar to how they did last year in the spring. They would be assigned, a certain number of paraprofessionals will be assigned to the remote school, and they will be used for generalization and practice, but not for direct teaching. That will be the role of the special education teacher.
Next question, I'd like to know if the cafeteria will be open for the high school students as well as where students will eat their lunch. Students at the high school will be able to eat in the student center. It has been set up with social distancing with desks so that the students will be 6 feet apart from one another, because when they eat lunch, they do not have masks on. We also will have students be eating in the gymnasium on the bleachers if that is needed. And students also have the opportunity to go outside and eat on the front patio. They have just, the PTA has just ordered more chairs so students can be outside and be socially distanced and have their masks off and eat their lunch.
If I may ask, one of the questions we skipped over, just because somebody may want the answer. How are you handling cohorts, both regular and special needs, with regard to siblings? And we have gone through all of our buildings, pre-K through 12, and we know exactly where the split is for our district, so that the principals have balanced their lists so that if we were to go hybrid, for instance, that your siblings would be off on the same days. Now, one of the things that could happen in elementary, our hybrid could look different than a Monday, Tuesday, or a Thursday, Friday, if, and depending on the reason that you would go hybrid, we could have an AM PM where students are allowed to still be in the school every day, but for half of the day, which would be a different hybrid. But if we go to a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, if we had to do that across the district, we know exactly where that split is, and that information will be coming to you within the coming days as you get information from your buildings.
Next question, will goals labeled as other qualify for recovery services?
If the goal is labeled other, it means that it was put off for the time being, but the student is still getting their special education services. So the concept of recovery would be if there were things that were not addressed through service problems. So that, say, the speech therapist got sick and we were unable to get somebody to come in. That's where we're looking at comp ed and recovery kinds of issues. Our goal is that if we label any goals other because they could not be worked on, that they'd be picked up again as soon as we got back into school.
If a child were to go from in-person learning to remote, how will that impact their IEP and their service providers?
They would switch to a different, somewhat different schedule, although I think remote school is trying to, as much as possible, look like the schedule that in school is running. So it's going to be very similar in terms of the structure. So they should be able to just move over with the same goals and objectives into the remote learning school.
And that's K-5.
Correct.
Yes.
My child is at,
Go ahead, sorry.
sorry, my child is at GHS. Is there a replacement for Carleen Wood? If no, where does the process stand?
The posting closes, I believe, this week or next week. And as soon as it closes, we'll have interviews the next day, and we'll replace her as soon as possible. One of our special ed teachers with an administrative license, Matt Hardigan, has been working this summer to help us out, making sure that we account for all of the comings and goings of students and make sure IEPs are being transferred if need be and meetings are happening. But he is just there for the summer to try and get us through until the permanent position I'm sorry, it's not a permanent position, it's an interim position until that person is hired for the school year.
Next question. Will there not be any remote teachers at the secondary level? We don't know how many teachers will be teaching remotely yet. That we hope to be making those decisions tomorrow, correct, Dr. Jones?
We will find out tomorrow as Human Resources finishes their meetings, but we are trying in secondary to keep students connected with teachers that are actually at the high school, at the middle schools, because we have to make sure that they have the content knowledge and the certification to be able to teach in those subject areas. So high school, secondary, in general, 612 looks a little bit different.
Are there any other, we're getting close to the end, so are there any other questions we haven't really touched on at all?
I'll just read one. Will students be required to take a COVID test before starting school as well as during? We cannot, as a public school, require COVID testing, and we're not allowed to do that. We are trying to work with one of the local COVID vans to see if they can basically park at one of our sites, so that if families want to get their students tested or if staff want to be tested, they know there's an easy site to go to. We were working on that today. Obviously, there's a high demand for the vans, so they have to be pre-booked, and we will let our families know if that option is there for students. But again, as a public school system, we cannot require our students to be tested before they return.
But I think at every meeting we've had, Mary Keller has emphasized that we really have to be partners in this, so that if your child is exhibiting any symptoms in the morning or anything that leads you to believe they may possibly be positive, that you keep them home, you contact your doctor. We really do have to depend on each other for this. So, we're expecting that parents do temperature check their kids before they leave in the morning, that you do go through the questions that we ask people to screen with at home to come in, because we can't do this alone as a school. We need your help, particularly with the health of your children.
Okay, it's 7:03, Dr. Jones. Would you like to tell them that we will make sure that we answer all the questions, and we will get back to them if the questions we were not able to answer tonight, we will get them answered for you.
And where to find those answers?
I'm reading that for Dr. Jones and you, Mr. D'Amico.
Yes, we will go through these questions, try to make sure they're added to our questions and answer document that we continue to build. We are trying to delineate what are some of the newer questions this week. The document itself, I think, is about 35 pages now, because we have answered so many questions. So we will try to have a special education section, so it's easier for this community to see your actual questions, and we will work to get those answered for you. So thank you to everybody that joined us tonight. We continue to try to get as much input as we can from the community, and we are very appreciative for all the questions that you asked, because it really does help in our preparation to open our doors in September, and we're grateful for the partnership. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.